What's going on, everyone? So, I was at a sports bar last night, watching the Warriors-Clippers game with a group of friends, just grabbing some beers and wings and expecting to watch Golden State take care of business against a Clippers team that's been inconsistent all season. The place was packed with Warriors fans because it's always a big deal when they play the Clippers, and the energy at the start of the game was pretty confident, even though LA has been playing better basketball lately. We had our table right in front of one of the big screens, and everyone was talking trash about how the Warriors were going to blow them out, making jokes about the Clippers' struggles this year. But then, the game actually started, and things just kept going wrong in the weirdest ways possible. And the vibe at our table went from confident to frustrated to absolutely furious over the course of 3 hours. By the fourth quarter, when Steve Kerr got ejected on what everybody in the bar agreed was a horrific call, half the people at our table were yelling at the TV, and the other half just had their heads in their hands. Then Steph fouled out with a minute left, and the bar went completely silent, except for one Clippers fan in the corner who was losing his mind. After the game ended on Jimmy Butler's airball, I pulled up First Take on my phone to see what Stephen A. Smith would say about this disaster, and what I watched was honestly one of the most passionate, angry segments I've seen them do all season. Stephen A. was absolutely going off about the referees. Shannon Sharpe was shaking his head about the Warriors' roster construction, and the whole panel was trying to figure out how Golden State blew a winnable game and what the hell they're going to do before the January 15th trade deadline. I ended up staying at that bar until like 1 a.m., just watching every reaction and breakdown I could find, because the Warriors' discourse after this loss was absolutely unhinged. Let me walk you through everything that went down on First Take, because the way they connected the terrible officiating to Curry's foul trouble to the roster's limitations to what needs to happen in 10 days was honestly some of the most comprehensive analysis I've heard all season. Hey, what's up, everyone? Before we jump in, let me ask you something that takes 1 second. That like button? Hitting it right now helps this channel more than you know. It's how we reach thousands more fans with this content. Just smash that like button real quick. It's the biggest way you can support what we're building here. Every like matters, so hit it now. So they opened the segment with this premise that, man, the Warriors played awful basketball, yet somehow they were in this game until the very end. And as you see on screen, there's this fire everybody, including the referees graphic, because the refs made a terrible call that sent Steve Kerr to the locker room, later sent Steph Curry to the bench with foul trouble, and ultimately contributed to a loss against the LA Clippers, who are actually playing decent basketball right now. They're breaking down this 103-102 loss to the Clippers in Inglewood and getting into everything that came from this matchup. But also, at this point, they have to start talking about Decision Day on January 15th, which is only 10 days away. The analyst had this Tim Kawakami fire everybody energy going, and Stephen A. was joking that he's going to do that every single time the Warriors lose to a sub-500 team. But the real story here is they lose their coach to a horrific call. And Snoop Dogg, who was on the broadcast, gave us this wonderful Picasso painting describing how Steve Kerr was ejected from the game. They showed the replay, and even Snoop, who's not exactly a professional analyst and may or may not have partaken in some fun, before the game was able to say, "That's a ridiculous call." Shannon Sharpe jumped in, at this point saying you never want to point to the refs in an opening segment, but when it's 103-102, and not the reason you lost, but technically it is because it's literally a 2-point difference, you have to acknowledge it. That would have been the difference in a Warriors victory. The play before that, with the lack of continuation for Steph, came up too, and Shannon was saying he agrees that complaining about refs isn't necessarily what won or lost this game for either side, but he thinks we see it quite consistently with Steph and his lack of whistle compared to other stars. Stephen A. was getting animated, asking if SGA throws that up. Is that a continuation? Probably, right? Warriors fans have grown frustrated with the lack of what feels like an even playing field with the official, and it's fair to call that out, especially when it was a one-point game and they clearly missed a goaltend. It's unfortunate, But there are other things to get into as well beyond just the officiating. Steve Kerr got ejected. Steph Curry fouled out with a minute to go after the Warriors pulled within 1 point after being down by 10. They had a chance, but as soon as Steph went to the bench, it's like, okay, Clippers sink 2 free throws. It's a 3-point game. We need to win this in regulation, fellas, because we don't have the bodies to compete. The Clippers were missing James Harden, but had Kawhi Leonard and Chris Dunn knocking down shots and just looked better for the majority of the night. Shannon was going through Steph's numbers, saying he had a pedestrian game by his standards, especially shooting the basketball. Final numbers were 27 points, but he was 9 of 23 and 4 of 15 from 3. You just looked around the court asking who's going to carry this team in the final minute. And it was Jimmy Butler with the ball in his hands for the final shot. It was a post-up fadeaway, not even from the elbow, kind of a corner shot. And it was a complete airball and complete buzzkill to finish the game. The analyst was emphasizing, it's very rare you get crunch time minutes with no Steph Curry due to foul trouble. And ultimately, that third quarter where the Warriors had just 13 points is probably what lost them the game. They came out flat, and without Steph on the floor, they literally couldn't generate offense, which was definitely disappointing. Jimmy's shot selection was discussed too. If there's one thing Jimmy does really well since putting on the blue and gold, it's his ability to pump fake and get to the line. So why not try that against Batum with Kawhi coming to help? Maybe get them both in the air, with enough contact to warrant free throw attempts. Stephen A. was shaking his head, saying, it's disappointing, and it's a lot of the same stuff they've talked about all season. The Warriors look pretty active on defense, which they've proven they can do. They're one of the best defensive teams in the NBA. But this team kind of is who they are now at 37 games into the season. 1 game above 500. They've squandered easy wins previously, and the same things impacting them from the first few games are still impacting them now. Shannon was making the point that it really comes down to looking toward what happens in 10 days, potentially. They have 8 home games coming up, but the real step change function is going to come after they're able to move some pieces. NBA championship teams aren't relying on Moses Moody to get extremely hot, Andrew Wiggins to knock down 50% of his threes, Will Richard to have a big game, and Brandon Podziemski to do big things. They're asking guys who aren't necessarily primetime players to be primetime players, and they just don't have enough. The analyst was saying Kerr's rotations don't help either, and the anti-Kerr crowd almost got their dream tonight, with Terry Stotts leading the troops to victory after Kerr's ejection. But it didn't happen. The addition of Guy Santos really energized them tonight, and has been energizing them every time he comes in over the last 2 or 3 weeks. The Clippers are just big with Zubac, with Brook Lopez, who's still a behemoth even if he's older, Kawhi, who's no small player, Chris Dunn, who's pretty big for a guard, John Collins, who's tall and athletic. Having Kawhi out there allowed the Warriors to have more of a puncher's chance from a size perspective. But Stephen A. was cutting to the chase, saying it really comes down to roster construction now. With Moses Moody, they're in year 5, and it's pretty clear who he is. A fringe rotation guy who will be in the NBA for a long time because he's incredibly active on defense, but couldn't hit the broadside of a barn when teammates are generating open looks. Whenever he has the ball in his hands, he's never confident dribbling. Stephen A. was saying he doesn't want this to be like his Kwame Brown rant. But what the hell is going on? You're a shooting guard, and you pick up the ball on the wing on a fast break and can't make a move to get to the hoop? Shannon was comparing him to DeAnthony Melton, who brings a dynamic that Moody doesn't. Melton hasn't been shooting great from deep, but he tore his ACL 13 months ago, so you cut him slack as he gets his playing legs under him. But Melton's ability to get to the hoop and create off the bounce is what you want from a shooting guard. Someone who can be a secondary ball handler, create for others, and get to the rim. Moses Moody has not proven at any instance of his career to be able to do that at starting caliber level in the NBA. The trade deadline discussion really heated up at this point, with them looking at Moses at $13 million and Kuminga at $24 million. That's $37 million combined. Stephen A. was saying there are a few different ways you can change the roster, and it doesn't have to be just one move. You could get multiple players you feel are upgrades at both positions. Anything is going to be an upgrade from Kuminga because he's not playing, so what you get will be better than what you have now. If you upgrade Moody as well, you could go 2-for-1 for $37 million combined. That's the Herb Jones and Trey Murphy route so many have talked about, though that's closer to $50 million. Shannon was asking what the realistic options are, and they started breaking down potential targets. The reach tier was discussed first, guys like Giannis and Anthony Davis, where if you can get them, you take the swing. Stephen A. was saying he's not as high on AD because he's too injury-prone. He's been available in playoffs, but is that really the player they need right now? Giannis obviously would be amazing, but the Warriors aren't getting him. Shannon was asking about AD from a ceiling perspective, which is how he's looking at this entire thing. Who are ceiling raisers? That's where the Draymond conversation comes up, because when you consistently look better with him off the floor, it screams that he's not much of a ceiling raiser anymore, and he's expendable. When Steph's off the floor, it's a completely different team. Play Steph against the Thunder, and you have a chance, but play Draymond, and you don't. He's a nice complementary piece, but not the player he once was. Anthony Davis can hold his own down low, and with a minute left, you can give him the ball to get a bucket or block a shot on defense. The thought of him healthy is appealing, but what's his contract situation? They think it's this year plus one more, so you're putting him on the exact same timeline as Curry. It's like throwing it on green at the roulette table. If it hits perfect, you could win a ring because AD can still give you 28 and 10 every night. But the issue is, he's been street-clothed and designer outfits. You just don't know with him. Stephen A. was making the comparison that Trey Murphy is going to be on the floor, where you have a wing and someone who plays. Worst case, you ran into bad luck. With Anthony Davis' worst-case scenario, we knew it. Why would we expect any different? Why would you go for an injury-prone veteran who's in the twilight or past his prime to pair alongside a team that's already the second oldest in the NBA? Giannis feels like more of a championship window extender, while AD feels like trying to catch lightning in a bottle. Shannon was saying directionally, Trey Murphy is probably the right place, though. He doesn't know if New Orleans wants to trade him, and the asking price might not be reasonable. Someone in the First Take audience apparently said it would take 3 first-round picks to get Trey Murphy, and everyone laughed. But Stephen A. was saying it probably will take 3 firsts because he's exactly the player you need in today's NBA. If Jonathan Kuminga isn't a real asset when combined with 3 first-round picks to get Trey Murphy, then what was all that talk about him being the best asset in the league, according to anonymous scouts? Shannon was saying maybe you package Moody too and get Herb Jones as well, who's a step up over Moody. But the asking price from New Orleans will almost be too high because they don't have to trade Murphy. They have to want to. Joe Dumars has proven to be somewhat irrational when making trades, so it probably takes at least 3 firsts to get him to part with Murphy. And this is where Michael Porter Jr. entered the conversation as a potentially better target. Looking at this game, the biggest issue besides the terrible goaltending call was that third quarter where the Warriors couldn't hit anything. They went 7 of 25 from the floor, 2 of 12 from 3, with shooting splits of 28% and 17%. They were down 12 because they need someone else who can reliably put the ball in the bucket. That's where MPJ gets more interesting than Trey Murphy. MPJ's concerns are on the defensive end and his injury history, but he's playing at an all-star level right now. Seeing what he's capable of on offense in Brooklyn when they run things through him is really encouraging. Thinking about a tandem of Jimmy, Steph, and Michael Porter Jr. is exciting, and having Draymond and Jimmy on defense can help cover up some of Porter's defensive limitations. Stephen A. was emphasizing that the more they watch this team and their inability to put the ball through the hoop, MPJ becomes the player they really have to go after. You have injury concerns, but he's probably going to be an Eastern Conference All-Star this season and deserving of it. Shannon agreed 100% and brought up another key point. Brooklyn has more incentive to get rid of MPJ than New Orleans does with Trey Murphy. Packaging Kuminga, Moody, or Buddy Hield and picks to Brooklyn makes more sense organizationally. Kuminga is still 23, so you're packaging him with guys who are his peers. And you can tell Brooklyn, we'll give you the keys and see what you can do. See, that makes more sense than shipping Kuminga to New Orleans to play with Jordan Poole and whoever else is down there. The logic is right that the Nets being more willing to deal makes sense. They don't have everything in-house unless you really believe their young guys like Nick Claxton and others will become franchise players, but they all look like pieces. They're really young and need more asset. If they could flip MPJ into 2 first-round picks, Jonathan Kuminga and Moses Moody, that's not the worst thing when you look at it from their perspective. Shannon was saying giving up Moody and Kuminga and whoever else to make money work won't hurt that much, because you still have Gary Payton too, getting plenty of minutes. Goy Santos stepping up, Trace Jackson-Davis contributing. Consolidating isn't the worst thing. It's just about how valuable those first-round picks are. Another option is taking on MPJ's contract, and then, in 2 years, when you're competing again, a championship team wants him, and you get those picks right back. He'll be 27 hitting his prime, so assuming he stays healthy, you have another asset and capital to use. Stephen A. was getting excited about lineup construction, thinking about Steph, Melton, Jimmy, Michael Porter Jr., and Draymond. From a defensive perspective, you have playmakers in Draymond and Jimmy, instant offense in Steph and MPJ, and a secondary ball handler plus point-of-attack defender in Melton. MPJ is 6'10" and not small at all, plus he rebounds and brings length and athleticism, which fits the Warriors' needs. The depth discussion came up with keeping Quinton Post and TJD to cut down minutes for Draymond and Wiggins over the 82-game season. Shannon was saying, you can survive with those guys until playoffs when you ramp up the veterans more. Stephen A. was even willing to eat some crow, admitting the team looks better without Draymond sometimes, and maybe he's better as a Swiss Army knife specialist, rather than playing 30-plus minutes every night. They wrapped up discussing other potential moves, mentioning Dylan Brooks having an awesome year in Phoenix, and how if Draymond just had that offensive production, he'd be the perfect player. They talked about Trae Young potentially going to Washington, which seems weird, and how guards who go there tend to struggle. The Eastern Conference trade market is interesting, but the Warriors need to focus on the West. What really struck me about this entire First Take segment was how they didn't just complain about the refs and Curry fouling out. They used it as a launching pad to discuss the deeper roster construction issues that have plagued Golden State all season. The loss to the Clippers was frustrating, but symptomatic of bigger problems that won't be solved without significant moves before January 15th. So, what do you guys think? Should the Warriors go all in on Michael Porter Jr., even with his injury concerns? Or should they target someone safer like Trey Murphy, despite the higher asking price? And is this team even capable of competing for a championship without major roster changes? Or are we watching the end of the Warriors dynasty in real time? Let me know in the comments, because after watching First Take dissect every angle of this brutal loss, from the officiating to Curry's foul trouble to what they need to do at the deadline, I'm genuinely concerned this team is running out of time to fix their problems before it's too late.